I'm Bill Putnam, CEO of Universal Audio. Today we're going to talk about some of the history of the company through the lens of one of our favorite products, the 610. In fact, we're here in the 610 recording studio, actually named after the console. We actually have one of the original modules here. The real context and one of the groundbreaking aspects of the 610 console, which was developed by my father in the 50s, was modular design. Before he did this, before he designed the 610 modular console was all just, one big glop of circuitry. One of the channels went out, you had to just basically take the whole console down, and he didn't see why you wouldn't just make them all separate modules like we are all, know and love today. It was a tube console. Again, my dad designed it in the 50s. A lot of what he did was there weren't places like Musician's Friend back in those days. And if you were going to build a recording studio, you needed to go and beg, borrow, or steal equipment from other industries. And back then that meant, the telephone industry, broadcast. There wasn't any specific industry making stuff just for the recording studio. He soon realized that his challenge in putting together a studio was shared by so many others, and there was an opportunity there. So he ran the studios. He started in Chicago in the 40s, actually, after World War II. He was in the Signal Corps and learned about broadcasting the Armed Forces big bands. They were tape delaying and recording that. And after the war, he started his own studios in Chicago, which was a great place and a great time to be in Chicago. A lot of the blues was there, Chuck Berry, early rock and roll, big bands like Duke Ellington, Stan Kenton, a lot of great singers like Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan. So he was recording a lot of that in his studios in Chicago. And he was making gear just barely able to keep up with the demands. And out of that came a bunch of consoles that were iterative designs, and eventually he got to the 610 console. When I think about my dad's motivations, I'm speculating. I was born in the 60s and did get to see him a lot in the lab and did get a sense on what he was after. And I actually think we end up obsessing about sound, especially in how we emulating old sounds, and so way more than he did. It absolutely had to sound great, but it was really more of a utilitarian point of view. I think he would be surprised and maybe a little amused about how much time we spend obsessing about the sound of gear and so on. He wouldn't think it's a bad thing, but I think it would surprise him a bit. So he was very utilitarian. So he wanted stuff that really, again, why are we making gear? For him, it was the need to run his recording studio, which was there in service of the artist, which is there in service of the music. I try to remember that. We get so lost in specs, and we get so lost in this, that, or the other, and what interface does it have, and which operating system is this going to work with. For him, it was really what absolutely went back to the music, and I think that's something that we've infused in the culture here. That what we do is relevant and important because it does serve the creative process. And he never forgot that. So it had to be easy to use, not lots of knobs that you could grab without looking. So I think that motivated a lot of the big knobs you see in the consoles and the pieces of gear that were fairly Spartan, not lots of, functionality, just very simple to use, because in the heat of the moment, it was about getting the take. Production then was more like in the moment, and let's just get this take and move on. So it had to be easy and in some case foolproof, to get the sound and print it and just move on. My dad moved from Chicago, I think in the late 50s, maybe early 60s. And what I always had heard growing up was that he moved because Frank Sinatra, who he was recording just about everything with, wanted to record on the West Coast, which I think had some truth. But then I talked to my older brother, who was around during this time, and he said, no, your dad, or our dad, was trying to get away from wife number 2. And so the truth comes out. So anyways, there was various things, domestic and, business, that brought him out to California. And once he was in California, he sold his studios. Folks had come up there like, Bruce Swedeen actually had heard some of my dad's stuff on the radio, and it really started a sound, and it started a, it was vibrant back then. But he moved out, started United and Western in Hollywood. He started studios elsewhere. But again, right place, the right time, an independent studio in Hollywood in the 60s. It just did great. A lot of classic stuff was recorded in his studios in Hollywood. Again, a lot of Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and then rock and roll, Beach Boys, Jan and Dean, Mamas and Papas. So he was there in the transition kind of from big bands to rock and roll, and a lot of studios didn't make that transition, but he had smaller rooms and he had rooms more focused on that as well. He really taught me through example that you could kind of do anything. You know, he wasn't one to sit around and make a list of reasons why something wouldn't work or why, because he decided he was going to get into speakers. He didn't know about speakers. He knew about room design. When he decided to get into room design, he didn't know about room design, and he just figured he could learn it. And, you know, he cared about the end result. He cared, he had ears and he used them. He was technical. He was an engineer. That's what he studied in school. But he didn't get lost in that. It was always in the result. It was very practical and towards the end. That said, he had his finger in a lot of pies. So he started the studios, and he designed his own rooms. He needed the electronics, so he learned how to design the electronics. He basically, by hook or by crook, would just have a vision, and he'd just make it so. So when they were out in Hollywood, they had in the attic a bunch of folks wiring 610 modules together, and that's how they were manufacturing that. Later on, he outgrew that, and they started a manufacturing operation in the San Fernando Valley in North Hollywood, and changed the name actually from Universal Audio, which was the first brand he had on the manufactured products, to UREI, United Recording Electronic Industry, where people outside the building would always call it URI, and people inside the buildings would say UREI. So the Universal Audio stayed on as a brand for some of the products, but the actual company was UREI, and they started to brand the products with that. So he had a lot of stuff going on. At that time, he was doing recording sessions, he was producing and engineering, he was building the rooms, he was running the business, he was designing products, he was running the manufacturing operation. He had a good team, but he was kind of all over the place, and he would, if he had a desire or an idea, nothing would get in his way. My dad didn't have a master plan for really any of this. It was really driven by the needs of his studio, and then as a secondary issue, what other people would have. And I think that was part of the lasting success, because he absolutely made stuff that made it easy to produce music. And I think when you look at the 610, when you look at some of the compressors, 1176, the LA2A, they're units that you could actually very quickly get a sound. Like, they're my go-tos in software, just because there's so easy to get a sound. You don't have to mess with it much. And I can only believe, just knowing him, that that's what he appreciated. So again, he was the customer. He knew the customer intimately. He knew the studio business, and that's what he was making products for. Very practical. I grew up around my dad, and I was really inspired by the inventor in him. I would see him in my backyard working on radio antennas. I would see him, he had a new project, so he'd build a shed, which became his workshop for that project. He brought in a 45-foot trailer into our front yard to develop the URI 813 monitors. I remember when he was working on the Cooper Time Cube in our garage, and so he was just always kind of a mad inventor. So that's how I became familiar with the company. By the time I was kind of old enough to pay attention to what was going on, he'd retired from the production side, the crazy long hours and so on, and he moved more onto the gear side. Radio was my first technical fascination, and I shared that with my dad. And so when I decided to go to school, I wanted to be technical in science, so I studied physics as an undergrad, and then I went into electrical engineering. Actually, after kind of wandering around for a while, not knowing what I was going to do, I thought I was going to be an academic, but realized I wanted to be on the business side, and realized I wanted to do something related to music. It seems obvious in retrospect that I would end up in music technology because that's what I saw. I really didn't realize that. I grew up around fantastic music. The first live music I saw was Duke Ellington. My dad would take me every week. He would sneak me into bars to see incredible jazz bands with a bunch of the great LA studio players. So I was inspired by music, but despite all that, I didn't really even conceive that I was going to go into it. But come grad school, I decided to focus on digital signal processing. I decided to focus on, applications of digital signal processing to audio. Had the idea about emulating classic analog equipment in digital. I was going to school at Stanford in electrical engineering at the time and switched my ambitions from being a professor to being an entrepreneur. And so my brother and I were sitting around trying to figure out what to do. And I was an amateur guitarist, and my brother was way more into recording than I was at that time. And so he was educating me about the fact that to get things like a 610 module or an 1176 or an LA2A, you had to spend, many thousands of dollars, and they were hard to get. And, I was like, wow, that sounds like a business opportunity. So I actually had to go back and learn a lot about the stuff that I'd seen a lot of history, but some of the earlier stuff I wasn't around for. So I'd seen the consoles. We had, I wish I had half of what I saw flow through my house in my dad's garage. It would be just amazing stuff. So we didn't have access to it by that point. So I had to go back and learn. I learned about the history of the 610 and so on. And we decided that we wanted to set out to build a company that both built analog products as well as digital emulations of analog products, which was pretty unique and still is at the time, and I think still is a unique position to be in. And we started with the analog. And my background's engineering, which is good and bad. Engineers, and this particular engineer is very good at underestimating projects. So I thought we would, in the first year, have 1176 out, an LA2A out, and then a 610, and thought, well, how could that take more than a few months? And I got educated how long it actually takes to get a product out, and it actually took us years to get it right. And I knew that on these products that we had no option but to just get it absolutely right. And that's an obsession and a passion. I would say more passion than obsession that stands throughout the entire company, is to really get this stuff, very accurate. And we started with the analog. And as we were starting with the analog and learning what really makes it sound the way it did, what are the important aspects of the sound? How do we determine if something's close? That was a big question. Listening, measurements, it's really not an exact science. We started on the digital modeling at the same time, but that took, about 5 or 6 years to get to the market as we were rolling out these analog products. So the 610's a fairly unique console, and when people ask me what preamp should I use, I don't think there's any single answer. We have software models of a lot of different preamps, and then there's other preamps out there that we make and that other companies make. And really, at the end of the day, it's what suits your musical purpose at that time, that microphone, that singer. But that said, I would say, the easy answer when people ask me what a 610 sounds like is it's warm. It definitely got that tube sound. It's not that super hi-fi. It has character. And that character is either something you're going to really love, or it's something that's not going to work for your purpose, and that's totally fine. It compresses a bit, so it's really nice on the right vocal. It's really nice with bass. It's something I can go to very quickly, and most of mine is software based, but frankly, the LA610 was my go-to piece of analog equipment. It was just so easy to get a sound there that I didn't have to spend much time on it. And I'd rather spend my limited amount of time that I get to practice or play music actually playing music and not messing with gear. So I tend to like very simple things that are very forgiving, and you can get a good sound very quickly. And the 610 is definitely like that. And in our product line, we have a lot of different formations of the 610. The 610 stands alone as a 1 or 2 channel preamp in either rack mount or sits on a desktop. But we've also paired it with the 2 famous compressors, the 1176 and the LA2A. And the basic idea there was, when we were looking at this, I'm actually saying this like I had a master plan. I did not have a master plan. I've learned so much about running a business in the last basically 20 years. and we take a lot more thought about what the product is. Then, our product research now is very extensive. We talk to customers, we visit studios, and I think one of the things we do well is really listen to the customers and so on. Every day as this company grows and we have more products, I'm doing stuff I've never done before. And I've done just about every job here, and good thing I'm not doing some of the jobs because there's people so much better than me. But back in those days, it was really just going out and talking to folks and, hey, what would you like to see? And what I heard was, channel strips were really important. People wanted the preamp, but they also wanted to have it matched with some nice dynamics. So we, made the channel strip, the 2 different channel strips versions. But what's really great about this is you can't afford, and I haven't been able to afford a 610 console, but you could afford 1 channel of it. And so you can go and do that. And that's basically what people need, for 90% of the applications. And it's great. I will just add one thing about the 610. I've been in pursuit of a 610 console forever. And one of the first I saw together was called the Green Board, which is up at Neil Young's ranch. He has 2 Universal Audio consoles. In fact, we modeled that very console. And when I was up there, I saw he had about over 40 UA 610 modules in various states of repair. And that was, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 years ago. And I've always wanted to get my hands on those. And I've at various times tried different offers of building a console, splitting a unit, making 1 console for us, 1 console for him. And anyways, long story short, they went up for auction last December. And I won. There were two lots, and so I have 37 610 modules now finally. And a side project is going to be going through those, getting those working, and building up at least one, probably 2 610 consoles for ourselves for these studios here.